What's up guys, TheJordude's here, back again with another Shadowverse video. This video is sponsored by Cygames. If you want to play Shadowverse for free, you could do so on any of your mobile devices or on your PC through Steam, with the link down below in the description. If you're into the competitive side of Shadowverse, you could go check out the NGE link. The Starforge Legends open season has just ended, but you could go check out their invitational tournaments that's coming out soon to go watch your fellow and favorite competitive players play it out to qualify for the World Grand Prix in Japan later in the year. If you're following the site, you can also get updates on upcoming tournaments, such as the next open season that will be starting up as soon as Starforge Legends wraps up. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about kind of a more narrow topic in this TheJordude's Strats series, and I'm going to be talking about two different types of decks that are commonly seen in the tournament meta, and I'll kind of give you like some insights about each characteristics of each type of deck so that you could consider them when you're building your lineup and creating your tournament strategy. So the decks I'm using in this video are just an example, though they are relevant to the time that I'm recording this video. However, you mainly want to keep in mind that I'm talking about these two types of decks, and the types of decks I'm going to be talking about are what I'm going to call individual decks, and that's going to be versus synergy decks. So the individual decks I'm using as an example will be Mid-Range Sword, a deck that's been doing really well in NGE recently, and Mid-Range Shadow. And then for the synergy decks, I'm going to be using Dirt Rune and Neutral Force. So I'm going to start off by talking about individual decks. So individual decks, the main characteristic about them is that generally they're mid-range decks. They could be aggressive decks. They're really, most of the time they're not control decks, because control is more kind of on the synergy side. But these are decks that are just basically playing cards that are good on their own, and they don't really worry about anything else that around you, pretty much. So like, if you're playing a card, you don't have to worry about the cards in your hand affecting that card you're playing, or you don't have to worry about your board affecting the card you're playing, or most of the time, and also a lot of times you don't have to worry about your opponent's board or hand when you're playing that card. So it's a card that is pretty linear, but it's very solid, consistent, it's good on its own. So cards like Geno is really good on its own, it's just a rush. You often get 2-for-1s in the early mid game. Albert, of course, is a good card on its own. Alwida's a good card on its own. So Mid-Range Sword is basically a deck that's just built with cards that are just good on their own, and that's why it's been doing well in tournaments, just because it's good, consistent. But I'll get into that a little bit later. And then for Mid-Range Shadow, very similar to Mid-Range Sword, you're just playing a lot of cards that are just good on their own. They don't worry about things around it when you're playing them. The only synergy in it is like Soul Conversion and like Lurking Corpse, Demon Eater. But these are kind of like soft synergies. They're not like, you need a combo off them, but you don't need like specific cards to combo with them. So you could Demon Eater pretty much any follower on your board really to draw 2 if you want. You could Soul Conversion any follower on your board. Lurking Corpse, you need to have like Soul Conversion or Demon Eater, so it's a bit more synergy, but since the card is just so has such a powerful effect, it's worth running. Synergy decks are mainly like archetype decks, so they revolve around a certain theme to it. So for Dirt Rune, synergy decks often have, like Dirt Rune, they have to have like at least 2 pieces of kind of like a small combo to have a greater effect. So obviously for Dirt Rune, you have the Earth Rites and the Earth Sigils to go off. And then if you get that combo off, you usually get a pretty good payout with them. And then for Neutral Force, they have the synergy with Beauty and the Beast and Hector's Kindly Treant. So for Neutral Force, they have to have a certain amount of neutral cards in your hand to go off, same as Elf Twins Assault. So why I could compare these two types of decks is that they're very similar, with mainly just one factor that differentiates them. So as you can tell from the 4 lists, they're quite mid-rangey decks. So the main difference is that synergy decks they play cards that they do care about what's in your hand or what's on the board when you play them, because they will affect the card that you play. Whereas the individual decks, they don't have that, right? Because Shadowverse, you have 20 life, it's super important that every turn you're doing something at least significant, because if you have like a very weak turn, like you don't do anything, or you just play a card, you don't utilize all your play points, it's not really efficient, you're going to fall really far behind. So the problem with synergy decks is that they have the they have the factor that because you need at least two cards or some kind of thing on the board in your hand to trigger off the synergy. If you don't have that, if you only have one side of the synergy, then you just have like an average card or below average card that makes you fall behind in tempo, makes you brick your hand, have clunky hands. So having the synergy factor in it increases your chance of bricking. Another chance of bricking that you have is just that you have too much of a clunky hand. So maybe you have just like all your top end cards. But that's like pretty much every deck. The individual decks too could brick hard if you just have like all of your expensive cards in your hand, no early game cards. So synergy decks have that extra factor to that, to the chance of bricking, where if you just have one side of the synergy, you're just playing below average cards and you're just falling behind of your opponent that's just playing individually good cards and just outvaluing. So in tournaments, you'll often see the first place winner be having a lineup where the decks are just playing like the individual decks, so like mid-range sword or mid-range shadow. And that's because in tournaments, you're playing so many games and every game is super important for your tournament performance, that if you do end up having that, even if it's just a couple more percentage more chance of having a bricked hand that synergy decks have, then that could just lose you the tournament. So people that are playing the decks that don't have too much synergy with them and just consistently individually good, they'll often see a better run in the tournament because they have that one less variance where they could have a super bricky or clunky hand. However, you will see a lot of people topping tournaments with synergy decks, so you will see like Dirt Rune being in like the top 4 a lot of times. You'll see Neutral Force being in the top 4 a lot of times as well. However, the difference is that a lot of times they're not getting first place is because maybe they're not drawing their clunky hands, their bricked hands throughout the tournament, but once they reach in the top brackets, they finally get that brick hand because they're playing like in like an NGE tournament. The upper bracket, you would have to go from round 1 to the finals. That's like 7 rounds. If you're in the loser bracket, that's like 11 rounds to get to the finals. So like if you're playing that many games, maybe you win the first time you play it, or maybe it takes at least one try for the deck to get a win in Conquest. So maybe throughout the tournament you play a deck maybe like 12 to 15 times, right? And then you haven't bricked at all until you get into the upper brackets. But then it's because you're playing so many times, every time you're playing, there's always that chance where you have like that bricked hand. And then so maybe you hit the top 4 and then you get like a bricked out hand. You get like all your Beauty and Beast in your open hand, or all your neutral cards, or all your Forestcraft cards so you can't activate your neutral activators. Or maybe you just draw all your Earth Rights and none of your, or all your Earth Sigils but none of your Earth Rights. So that's like the difference in tournaments, where a lot of times the first place decks are just playing the individual decks, because the synergy decks, though they can top, because they actually have higher power level than the individual decks, if they draw correctly. But the time where they brick, it would cost them the match, and then that just costs them the tournament. The way I'm portraying it is, it sounds like that you just always want to play the individual decks because they just seem to be consistently better over the long run. Synergy decks could be good in the short run, in the short amount of games. They have the higher potential if they draw well, but it's not always the case. There are some synergy exceptions. So in this format, the exception would be kind of like PDK Dragon. There's some synergy with Prime Dragon Keeper. You have to play 3 costs or less of followers to activate its effect. Prime Dragon Keeper has to be overflow. But what makes this deck different than the other synergy decks I was talking about is that it's just really well refined, and then it's super consistent. So like the way Dragon works is because you're playing the good ramp cards, like Isla, super good card, and you're consistently hitting overflow for your Prime Dragon Keeper. So that's one synergy condition met. And then because you're just playing good cards that cost 3 or less, like you always just play Dragoon Scyther anyways. Maelstrom Dragon is not bad of a card because you're hitting overflow, so it's a 2 cost for a Storm. It's pretty good. Dragon Summoner you're playing anyways. Ivory Dragon's kind of like a new addition, but it's a cycling card that just costs 1, so it's good anyways. So like the synergies in this is so minimal, but when you land the synergies, you have that higher power than like individual decks. That's what makes this deck like tier 0 or the best deck in the meta. It's just because it's a synergy deck. In some sense, it is a synergy deck, but because it's super consistent like an individual deck, it just makes it like the best deck in the meta because it's just super powerful. It's got synergies, consistent, got the additional effects, etc. Another exception, like in previous formats, would have been like the old neutral sword, because the deck, all the neutral cards were individually good, they're fair statted, and then they had the upside if they had the synergy. That's what made the deck really good. So yeah, that's basically my comparison between the individual and the synergy decks. In the end, I would recommend that you weigh your favors towards the individual decks, because in the long run you're less likely to brick, and bricking is super important in the game. That's why I would recommend you go for just the individual decks, because you have that one less variance of bricking, because if you do brick that time, you're going and you lose the match because of it, you lose out in the tournament, and you just go home feeling bad. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Check me out on my social media links down below in the description, and if you want to check out more of the Jordude'S strats, I'll have the playlist down below in the description as well as the outro. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
「夜を吐き出し、悲観とする我がさが湧き立つ